So good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I feel like a little bit representing the voice from overseas, and that's sort of fun because I think there are not many Europeans here that can criticize me. I mean, that can like shed another light on the things I'm gonna say. It's a topic of the conference is dear to my heart and to our practice of my father and the way I grew up. And the way I looked at it was more strictly urban horticulture since our first discussions with Eric Kramer. And I would like to first go quickly over a few points that might sound like words in the wind or theory, but they are not. And then I will go over 4 projects where urban horticulture in some form or fashion plays a major role. First, I would like to start with a brief sketch of some European tendencies. From listening to all of you, I think you are light years ahead. We are sort of struggling with older issues, older demons, and actually I see a sort of idealism in what you are telling, which is sort of uplifting, and I can only hope the wind blows it over the ocean. In Europe, we see a particularly strong decline in interest in horticulture, and we see it on all sides. We see it from the client side, we see it in the landscape architecture's practices, the developers, the school teachers. It's a practice. Let's say it's an attitude that is on a descending spiral, and the one player feeds the other. And I'm going to talk in landscape architects' minds. I feel a lot of soul searching. Are we artists? Are we architects? Are we landscape architects in the old style? What are we? There is a major inferiority complex towards architects, and desperately landscape architects, they try to look like for a Bowie to find a spot to be respected and exist. And many people find their own escape route. There are many landscape architects that try to be like artists, that create, I would call it, artistic installations. There are landscape architects that want to be architects, that flee totally into hardscape structures. That all is then stimulated by the media and a sort of intellectual level of journalists that are not very well aware of things, not very well informed, that are most of the time the journalists that are the critics for architecture projects, and they look for the sort of qualities of architecture into landscapes. They don't care about horticulture at all. That's then stimulated on its term by the media in a broader sense. In Europe, there is some totally useless debate, or let's say a struggle with the past. There is absolutely disrespect for the heritage of the 19th century, and people are thirsty for modernity. And modernity in the landscape, the earlier they see much hardscape or a catalog of material in all colors, this is inventive, this is new, this is modern, this must be it, this is new landscape architecture. So they support the harsher the projects are, the more sterile, the more applause they get. In competition juries, the more you talk about horticulture, the more you use plant material, the quicker you get slaughtered and shifted aside as an old-fashioned relic. And I can talk about that for hours. I mean, in the city of Berlin, for example, I have several examples. This search of modernity leads for many landscape architects towards a sort of interpretation of landscape architecture as a graphic art. People get totally satisfaction and a thrill out of seeing colliding lines, graphics in the landscape that's stimulated by, for example, the successful Citroën Park in Paris, where this landscape architect, Mr. Provost, made a circle with a diagonal line passing through it. Since then, in every competition, you see circles with diagonal lines going through it, and then offset little checkerboards. It's really amazing. And it would all be humoristic if it doesn't sort of pollute a whole generation of young landscape architects that get their training in schools, that get underfed with horticultural knowledge. They are unaware that horticultural material is just a tool of expressing, as is wood or glass or masonry for an architect. They are unaware, they are totally under-nurtured, and they come and apply for a job and they don't know the difference between a birch and a beech. They still get thought that Cotoneaster, a plant from the 50s, is still the plant to it's really amazing. So I think the role, we cannot hammer hard enough on the role of schools. It's where it all goes wrong, I think, where the problem is born. Then on the top of this sort of interacting playing elements is the shrinking offer and the standardization in European nurseries. It's really quite amazing that I would say trees that could be total cash cows like Japanese cherries are just not offered anymore in the nurseries. And then when I discuss with them and they say, yeah, but it's very simple, Mr. Wirtz, if landscape architects don't demand it in their projects, we don't produce it. I said, yeah, but you should try to tempt the landscape architects. Show this in your nursery. This is fantastic. You should use this. This has better fall color, bigger flowers, longer lasting flowering period. But they are not ready to do that. So the plants for the Japanese cherries, what can you get? The big Kanzan, the Mount Fuji, thank God that one is still there. Just a few. And the yellow, pastel green flowering ones, they even don't know anymore what it is. The very dark purple that flower early. It's really quite sad. The shrinking, if you compare catalogs of the 70s and 60s compared with now, is really a sad story. Then a second point I would briefly like to touch on the importance of our profession in our warming climate. The warming climate is there, even if the politicians don't want to believe it, it's there. The beech woods, for example, in the area where I live, beech woods that are there since the 18th century, they are all falling apart. The bark is not thin enough to sustain the heat of the sun, and the scientists say in 30 years beech woods will not be there anymore in Northern Europe. They will move to Scandinavia. And I think we do have a role to play because the warming up of the climate goes together with a decline in insect and bird life. Insect life, a quick example, the brooding nests of bees, and I know this from personal experience, brooding nests of bees that started to decline 15th of August continue now to far into September because the weather is good and temperatures are high. But of course, the plant material that still produces pollen and nectar are not there anymore. So they go into winter with a weakened and under-nurtured nest, weaker bees, more sensitivity to bacteria, to the damned varroa mite we all fight. etc. So I think these are issues we also can help to address. The climates in European cities are almost like semi-desertic. As you know, the cities are hotter than the countryside. The hardscape, the asphalt, the stone facade radiate and reflect the light. The warmer, drier, less water. So the need for drought-resistant plants and salt-resistant plants during the winter are increased and are increasing, and the landscape architects are not educated to know how to respond to it. On top of that, to make it typically human, instead of fighting for more plantings along highways in Europe, what happens, ecology movements, of which I should be the #1 supporter, they fight for cutting down 100-year-old American oak drives, alleys, just because they are American and not native. And these sort of fundamentalists that make out of everything a sort of religion and have a tunnel vision, they forget they have to see the broader spectrum and help to give an answer to the, let's say, the disadvantages of our heating climate. The role of schools, quite obvious, should school people and prepare people for that. Don't do it, however. And I want to, this topic just where I had a sort of eye-popping experience is in the country of Singapore, let's say. It's a small country, very densely built up, where urban horticulture is almost like a state policy. People have understood that to make a very dense skyscraper city livable in a tropical climate, they need to keep the temperatures cool on the sidewalk. So Singapore is just amazing. The skyscrapers, I mean, the old adagio of Corbusier, Le Corbusier, the tower in the park, is really there in Singapore. There is a human eye level on the sidewalks, and then the sky is shut off by a canopy of trees. All middle strips are densely planted. Of course, they are helped by high air humidity. And they are just cheap pictures from internet, but it shows something about street life in Singapore. And the skyscrapers come out like out of a cloud of trees. Here they're fantastic Samanea saman, or rain tree. And then Eric was questioning me about how does this all apply in your own practice. I would say in broad brushstrokes here, we, in our practice and in our education, we look for an absolute dominance of softscape compared to hardscape. Only that sort of love and attitude sets us apart. We almost have like our little niche because nobody still wants to do that. We love good structure. We love good green structures. We love strong readability in winter. So Eric, when I introduce how do you speak about your work to clients, it's an overpowering presence of softscape, strong readability in winter, strong structures. This can be organic structures or really geometric structures, and almost always the look for a contrast to the city, the busyness of the city. We always look almost like for an interior piece to every project. Quickly, the beneficial effect of being a design studio and a contractor. Until the 90s, our practice could only live from being a design-build firm because fees were so low and still are very low in Belgium, so you had to make a living from constructing your garden. That then has an enormous positive effect because you learn all the limitations, the difficulties, the booby traps, the ambushes of the contractors. What do they hide before reception of works, etc. It's quite useful. And you learn also the expressive potentials of all these plant materials because you have gone through all these experiences. And a last fun topic, the varied views of architects on landscape architect. You could fill in the dots here. We meet all kinds, but I would say a great deal see us as competitors for their architecture, and only a few enlightened, fantastic architects like Todd Williams, you showed the Barnes Foundation, understands that the two are complementary and that the two help each other. But in the architect's education, they are educated still the old-fashioned way that we are bush pushers and shrub-it uppers. So a few case studies, Jubilee Park, student housing project Camilo Torres in Leuven, a boulevard in Brussels, and a garden in Paris. At Jubilee Park, what is of, let's say, major importance, we tried in a very built-up artificial environment with 40,000 workers, banking people working in towers around this open spot. We had to create a park. Just the credibility, how can you make a park to something the eye believes, was already an issue by itself. Look at what sort of wounds we had to deal with. A garage entry, enormous skylights, emergency exits, an SOM pavilion, which is the entrance to an underground shopping center, and then the Foster entrances, Norman Foster entrances to the Jubilee line. So this garden is laid on two underground boxes, the shopping gallery and the Norman Foster, and then with liability issues you can't believe. What we try to do is create an oasis with a totally fooling of scale, with almost car. We fill up the boundary heavy densely with trees, and we carve out some sweeping lawn spaces in the middle and have a spine that sort of forms a backbone through the space. This is the SOM, this is the backbone, these are the two Fosterhood, the Lehman Brothers building, where we literally lived the emptying of that building within a few hours, quite unbelievable. And then this was all docks and now built up with buildings. This is an amazingly harsh environment. This is all concrete, asphalt, glass, steel, and thousands of people working, pouring out of these subway exits and trying to eat their sandwiches in this park. So looking for an oasis, we blocked out, we almost tried to block out the city with this massing of metasequoias, and this is one of my earlier points, how metasequoia can be a tool to a landscape architect to create, by its almost monoculture, create a special palette, a special light filtration, and a special sort of spiral, statuesque beauty. It's almost in its verticality going into a dialogue with these high-rise buildings. And here and there we have a sweeping elevated grass walls with Belgian limestone cladding. What we call the spine, a sort of jagged elevated river with little weirs, and evening pictures, not so interesting. And you see how after a few years the outside city starts to being blocked out. We were once heavily criticized in Landscape Architecture magazine for this park, but the author just pointed out as criticism all the things we just wanted. The creating little coves of peace where you are away from the city, the uplifting, estranging effect of finding peace to read a book, etc. Very confusing by breaking it up. It's sort of disorienting the the size of that little park. And that's seen from the buildings. Then this student housing from the 70s, I wanted especially to show you how a sort of organic composition, if you use a smart, robust palette of plants, this is from the early 70s, even in the city can survive time. This is a project in the middle of the city of Leuven, a medieval city with a bustling university, and these are rather cheap student housing. And just a layout of these elevated beds in an almost arbitrary fashion, linking entrances, etc. But then densely planting gives this. This is a bad scan of the slide, but this is just a view from the street. This is an entrance to the street, and this is what it is now today. So, denying the orthogonal grid of the architects and just waiving a system of organic paths, rounded beds. And this is after 30 years and almost, no, this is more, 40 years, and almost no maintenance. Entrance to the basement. So a sort of microcosm created by dense planting. Snowberry, tree of heaven. Then of a total different nature, a boulevard in Brussels. The boulevard in Brussels was a peculiar project. It's in a sort of 60s crazy idea of a quite a horrible politician actually, to wanting to create in the north of Brussels a sort of little Manhattan, raising all old architecture and creating this wannabe Manhattan, which is truly a wannabe, it's nothing to do with Manhattan, and creating a middle strip, thank God, where the tenants of all the buildings put money in one pot that financed the shrubbing up of the middle strip. And the middle strip, my father, to make this middle strip meaningful, he came up with two things. He came up with a consistent pattern of diagonals and a straight edge definition with one tree. The diagonal, so edging planting is honey locust, diagonal plantings are columnar oaks from Europe. And the other thing I forgot, sorry. That's the boulevard seeing out from a building. So you see the middle strip with the diagonals. And the second thing, by creating that consistent, continuous pattern, the space looks much more grand and interesting. You fool the scale than it is, and funnily enough, you confuse your orientation. This is to show the high quality of this architecture. Seeing from the street. These diagonals with their columnar definition start to confuse you. Even being on the middle strip on a boulevard, you start to feel you are in the park and you're not anymore exposed to the street. And you lose what's before a canyon of glass and steel starts to become a place to stay. Also total transparency requirements to avoid prostitution pickups here. And it's a popular spot for manifestations because it's close to a major train station. And then the politicians were smart enough to, at every intersection of a diagonal, to put sculptures. It's like a major move of one minister in one period. So this is still a gate, but most of them break up the perspective. So I think here landscape architects what they bring to the table in horticulture is how the simple palette of materials can create and brand the identity of the park, of the green space. then I end with a sort of much more grand and formal project, the Tuileries competition in Paris with the Carousel Gardens, which we got assigned to. This is a competition of the early 90s, where, to our amazement, we were co-winning landscape architects. The French team got the old Tuileries to revamp, and we got this former parading courtyard. The castle, let me show you another picture. The castle of the kings, where also Napoleon lived, was closing off this space, the Tuileries castle here, overlooking the Le Nôtre Baroque garden here. And this was all parading ground, and there's some fantastic old slides where you still see in the castle complex of the kings, housing being unbelievable, late 19th century pictures. So this is a project I want to touch quickly upon because it's now 23 years ago that competition, and the project is still not finished. You see? Those plantings, you'll see immediately in the plan, those plantings are not done, those plantings are not. Why? Because the government changed and the direction of the museum changed. And they found the garden a nuisance that costed them money to maintain. We know in France the rumors behind the curtains are more important than the rumors in front of the curtains. So the rumors behind the curtain told us that they had budgeted the destruction of the garden. We couldn't believe our eyes. The thing costed 65 million French francs, and they would consider to destroy it. So you know the Napoleon Arch, iron paste, 2 pyramids. And this is a fun picture of 1882, just before destruction of the castle, where the courtyard is still a parading ground for military troops, where the public stays here at the fence to look at the troops. Quite an amazing thing. The government decided to destroy the castle as a symbol of the ancient regime. So this is a project with this fan-shaped pattern of hedges that lead to the arch, trying to give the arch a stronger role as a key. Oh, this is not good. I'm going to go fast over this one. So the arch is a sort of centralizing device to pull all the attention to the arch. The arch becomes like a door. Thank you very much. A door to the perspective, and left and right, because it's an asymmetric trapezoidal space. Left and right, we give it big shoulders with raised gardens, and then to the extreme corners, also raised gardens, but at the lower base. So this is what it is now, with here at the spot of the former castle, these gentle curve that create this nice tension between these two end pavilions. The strips of stone that starts the fan pattern, and they descend into the garden. They house 20 sculptures of Mayol. You see the excellent maintenance. And then the whole play with scale. Not only the forced perspective of the fan pattern disguises totally the scale, but also the hedges start low at 1 meter high, and at the end they are 10 feet above you. So you also lock yourself up in a little microcosm away from the sound of the city. That's seen from the museum, looking down over the Le Nôtre garden. Another view from the museum, the two elevated gardens, left and right of the 1806 arch of Napoleon. And there you see how the garden is sunken to create this secludedness and different character. The two gardens left and right of the arch, with each its other sculptures, like garden rooms. And I end with an exceptional snow picture